History is not always written on the battlefield. There are moments when the fate of humanity hangs not on the outcome of a charge, but on the hidden meaning within a line of text. During the Second World War, as the world burned, another conflict was waged. A silent, invisible, yet decisive war of ghosts in the wire. It was a war of code, of ciphers, of letters that paraded as nonsense. On one side, Nazi Germany, its armies advancing with terrifying speed, its communications shielded by a system believed to be inviolable. On the other, the United Kingdom and its allies, desperately searching for a way to pierce that electronic veil. At the heart of this conflict was a machine, Enigma. It was the device the Germans used to conceal every order, every strategy, every movement. Its code was a living thing, changing with each new dawn. Every day, its shadow fell across the war, claiming victims without firing a single shot. But then, a new kind of soldier entered the fray. A quiet, brilliant mathematician named Alan Turing, a man who did not raise his voice, who did not seek glory, but who, with the sheer force of his intellect, could redirect the river of history. The Enigma machine was not born a weapon. It was designed in the 1920s by the German engineer Arthur Scherbius, intended to encrypt messages for the world of industry and commerce. But as Nazism tightened its grip on Germany, the military saw its potential. They adopted it, refined it, and by the outbreak of war in 1939, Enigma had become the secret shield of the Wehrmacht, the armed forces of the Third Reich. To the untrained eye, it was a curious object, resembling an elaborate typewriter. But within its casing lay a labyrinth of rotors and wires. With every press of a key, the internal configuration shifted, the electrical pathway rerouted. A typed letter would become another, but according to a logic that was in constant flux. Each day, the machine's settings were reset according to a new key. The possibilities were astronomical, calculated at over 150 million combinations. Any codebreaker would have to find the one correct key before the stroke of midnight, when the entire puzzle would reset. Meanwhile, German communications crisscrossed Europe with impunity. Convoys received their orders. U-boat wolf packs received their targets, sinking Allied ships in the cold expanse of the Atlantic. The British knew these messages existed. They could intercept the frantic crackle of Morse code, but the content remained gibberish, an unbreakable stream of characters. Until someone decided to challenge the impossible. North of London, nestled amongst quiet trees, stood an anonymous country estate, shrouded in secrecy. It was called Bletchley Park. This was no military base, no operational headquarters. It was something entirely new, a place where the war was fought not with bayonets, but with minds. It was here that a different kind of army was assembled, an army of linguists, mathematicians, and chess champions, tasked with defeating a machine that was, for all intents and purposes, a perfect thinking opponent. The challenge was not merely to break a code, but to outpace the cold, relentless logic of a machine designed to be unbreakable. It was a battle of human intuition against mechanical certainty, a race against a clock that reset every 24 hours, with the fate of millions hanging on every second. In the gathering twilight of a world plunging into war, a different kind of army was being assembled. The British Empire summoned its sharpest minds, the mathematicians and the linguists, the chess grand masters and the abstract thinkers. Their battlefield was not to be one of mud and wire, but of intellect and intuition. Their objective was singular, almost mythical: to break the unbreakable, to decipher the indecipherable, to win the war without firing a single shot. Among the faces gathered in the quiet halls of Bletchley Park, one did not command attention, but compelled it. Not for his voice, nor for any outward charisma, but for his gaze, a look that seemed to pierce through the immediate and into a realm of pure, unadulterated logic. This was Alan Turing, a man who seemed to exist in a state of permanent solitude, eccentric certainly, but possessed of a genius that bordered on the prophetic. He spoke little, his words often catching in a hesitant stammer. He walked with his head bowed, as if in constant conversation with the universe of ideas moving within his mind, ideas for which the world was not yet prepared. Turing arrived at the sprawling Victorian estate in 1939, a young man of just 27, and from his very first day, he saw the futility of the task before them. To attack the German Enigma machine by hand, with pay, was staggering, its permutations numbering more than the atoms in the known universe. Something new was required, something that had never been seen before. While his colleagues pored over intercepted messages, searching for faint patterns, Turing sketched diagrams. While they performed endless calculations, he designed the architecture for a new kind of machine. A machine conceived not to compute numbers, but to wage a war of logic against its German counterpart. He called it, with stark simplicity, the Bombe. It was a leviathan of metal and wire, a cabinet of whirring gears and clicking relays that stood over 6 feet tall. It groaned and ticked, its banks, oh, it was a finely tuned organism with a single relentless purpose: to hunt for meaning in an ocean of cryptographic noise. But the machine could not think for itself. It could not simply be switched on to await an answer. It needed a place to start, a foothold, a crack in the fortress wall of Enigma's code. And so, Turing's team began the painstaking search for cribs. They hunted for the small, predictable habits of the German operators, the bureaucratic tics and hidden details buried within the messages. A repeated word, a common sign-off, a signature. They were searching for the ghost of human routine inside the cold language of the machine. Then they found it. A phrase that nearly every German officer was instructed to type at the start of certain dispatches. Heil Hitler. 2 words, 8 letters. Always there, always in the same place. It seemed insignificant, a tiny flaw. But to Turing, it was a gateway, a sliver of light through an impenetrable wall. It was a chance. He configured the first sequences. The bomb began its hunt, its drums spinning, testing thousands of possibilities per second. It tried, it failed, it tried again. The nights bled into days, the days into weeks. There was nothing but the relentless, percussive sound of the machine. The hum of the bomb was a constant presence, a repetitive, hypnotic and frustrating melody. It seemed to mock the profound silence of the codebreakers as they waited for a sign, a result, a breakthrough. And then, one ordinary day, on a grey morning indistinguishable from all the others, with no premonition, no promise of success, it happened. The machine stopped. The cacophony ceased, replaced by a sudden, deafening silence, punctuated by a single, decisive click. The engineers approached with caution, checking the dials, rechecking the wiring. The message was there. Printed on a slip of paper, it was naked, unambiguous. For the first time, Enigma had spoken their language. A German communication, perfectly legible. Real words, coordinates, orders. No longer a meaningless jumble of symbols chasing each other into the void. For a moment, there was an absurd, surreal silence. Then, trembling hands passed the slip of paper from one desk to another. There were tears and disbelieving smiles and shouts of victory repressed in their throats. That moment was more than a discovery. It was a liberation. A silent scream of defiance hurled against fate, born from months of failure, solitude, and gnawing frustration. It was a victory won in secret, a turning point in history that would remain unknown for decades. It was the profound, earth-shattering proof that the most decisive battles are not always fought by armies, but sometimes by a single unconventional mind refusing to accept the impossible. Alan Turing had opened a door, and behind that door lay not merely a message, but the power to alter the very fabric of reality. The signal had been deciphered. The code had finally collapsed. But in the hushed confines of Bletchley Park, there was no celebration. No toasts were raised, no fanfares of triumph sounded. There was only silence, a profound, heavy silence, pregnant with the crushing weight of awareness. From that moment forward, every German word that sliced through the ether was a possibility. Every intercepted order was a chance to preempt, to strike, to save. But it was also a curse, because to know was to be forced to choose. Within hours, the first decrypted messages were transmitted in the deepest secrecy to London. Inside the Admiralty, British officers scrutinized the flimsy sheets of paper, their faces etched with disbelief. They were real. A German U-boat wolf pack was closing in, preparing to strike a vast Allied convoy in the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. Armed with this impossible knowledge, a single, coded order was sent. The convoy altered its course. The ships, and the hundreds of souls aboard them, were saved from an attack they never even knew was coming. They were ghosts, saved by a warning they would never hear, from a threat they would never see. Yet this power could not be wielded freely. They could not intervene every time. They could not save every life. For if the German High Command ever suspected, if even a whisper of a doubt arose that their Enigma machine was no longer secure, the codes would be changed in an instant. The advantage, the key to winning the war, would be lost forever. And so, a new kind of war began. A war fought not with bullets and bombs, but with moral calculus and agonizing restraint. This was a war of knowing and choosing not to act. A war of allowing an attack to proceed, of sacrificing a ship, a battalion, a town, to protect the ultimate secret. It was the terrible arithmetic of letting some die today so that many more might live tomorrow. Turing and his colleagues existed within this purgatory. Every decoded message was a double-edged sword, every decision a fate of thousands on their shoulders. There were no medals for their victories, no public recognition for their sacrifices. There was only the sound, the ceaseless, mechanical heartbeat of the bomb machine, its relays and rotors clattering day and night, an artificial heart pumping lifeblood into a continent on the brink of collapse. While soldiers fought and died in the deserts of Africa and on the beaches of Normandy, while the world watched the grand theatre of invasions and bombing raids, the most decisive moves of the war were being played out on a keyboard. Inside a series of anonymous wooden huts, numbers were being forged into weapons, and quiet mathematicians were becoming the most effective warriors in human history. Historians now estimate that the breaking of Enigma shortened the Second World War by at least 2 years. Some argue it was as many as 4. Thousands of aerial bombardments that never happened. Millions of lives that were not extinguished. Yet the name Alan Turing appeared in no newspaper, was etched onto no monument. History, it is said, is written by the victors. But what of the victories that must never be spoken of? What of the wars won in silence, whose heroes are condemned to anonymity? Their triumphs are not recorded in stone or ink, but are measured only in the absence of tragedy, in the quiet continuity of a world that was saved without ever knowing it was on the verge of being lost. As the world's bonfires of victory burned into embers, one man retreated into the shadows. His task was complete, and with it, a silent, unshareable glory faded from view. The secret he carried was not a trophy of war, but a burden, a lifetime condensed into the crushing weight of silence. No one could know, no one was permitted to know. For him, the war had not truly ended. It had only changed its form. Alan Turing had saved an estimated 14 million lives. He had waged a silent, intellectual war against the most formidable cipher machine ever created, the German Enigma. From the clandestine workshops of Bletchley Park, he and his team had bent its will, deciphering a torrent of secrets that turned the tide of the conflict, shortening the war by years. He had altered the very destiny of the modern world. But in the eyes of the nation he helped save, he was no hero. He was not even a free man. In 1952, a mere 7 years after the fall of the Third Reich, he was arrested. The charge was not treason nor espionage, but a violation of Victorian-era law, gross indecency. Turing was a homosexual, and in the rigid, unforgiving society of post-war Britain, to love the wrong person was a crime. It did not matter that his mind had navigated the darkest labyrinths of Nazi communication. It did not matter that without his genius, the Atlantic would have remained a graveyard and the beaches of Normandy might have been forever lost. He was different, and that was enough. The authorities offered him a choice, a cruel parody of justice, 2 years in prison or a new experimental punishment, chemical castration. He chose the latter, hoping to continue his revolutionary work on the machines that would one day become computers. He chose science over a cell. The price was devastating. The hormonal treatment, a steady injection of synthetic estrogen, began a slow chemical dismantling of the self. It ravaged him physically, and it fractured him psychologically. The body that housed one of history's greatest intellects began to change against his will. The mind that held the keys to the future began to cloud. The genius who had defeated an empire's encryption was being systematically erased by the very country he had rescued. In 1954, at just 41 years of age, Alan Turing was found dead in his home. Beside his bed lay a half-eaten apple, laced, it was later determined, with cyanide. The official Verdiolic image, a nod perhaps to his favorite fairy tale, Snow White, a story of hidden poison and a deep, unnatural sleep. The father of artificial intelligence, the pioneer of the digital age, the man who had gifted the world a future he would never see, died in silence, forgotten, condemned not for what he had done, but for who he was. For decades, his name remained buried under the Official Secrets Act. The hero was a state secret. The criminal record was public knowledge. His sacrifice, his mind, his colossal contribution, all were classified, expunged from the popular narrative of the war, entombed by military secrecy and social prejudice. Only years later, as the 20th century waned, did the truth begin its slow journey into the light. Piece by piece, document by declassified document, the story emerged, and the world finally discovered the man it had wronged. Not an eccentric, not a criminal, a savior, a visionary. In 2009, the British government issued a formal public apology for his appalling treatment. In 2013, the Queen granted him a posthumous royal pardon, a legal absolution he was not there to receive. His name at last was returning to the light. Universities dedicated lecture halls to his memory. Museums built entire exhibits around his work. Conferences on the very intelligence he conceptualized now bore his name. And in 2021, his face appeared on the new £50 banknote. Where he had once been erased, he was now venerated. Alan Turing did not win the war alone, but it is a cold certainty that without him, the victory would have been different, costlier, and perhaps impossible. His legacy is a complex code in itself, a story of a man who conceived of machines that operate on pure, dispassionate logic, yet was destroyed by a society governed by the most illogical of human flaws. The architect of a new age, undone by the prejudices of an old one. His battlefield was not one of mud and steel, but of pure abstraction, a silent, relentless war waged with numbers, with logic, and with the profound courage to see what others dared not even imagine. Today, in the silent hum of a server, in the glow of a billion screens, his ghost lives on. Every query we send into the digital ether, every machine that learns, is an echo of a mind that first taught a machine how to think. It is a stark reminder that the minds capable of building the future are often misunderstood by the present. For an idea, once born, cannot be erased. It simply waits for a world ready to receive it.